Welcome everyone to this first lesson in this masterclass, Basic Principles, where we will go through some fundamental tips and tricks that you will use a lot during this masterclass. And this is what we gonna recreate: a simple cylinder traveling up and down on a nice wavy path. And as you can see, it loops perfectly. It's only 39 frames here, but it looks like it's seamless. So start by creating a new project, and we want to see our floor here as well, or grid. And before we get started, we want to do some project settings, and you can get there by pressing Command D or Edit and Project Settings. And here we want to change the key interpolation to linear, and we would like to have a PSR button up here as well. You can get that by pressing Shift C, and you get this search field, and just type PSR, and then you take this guy and drag it up and drop it here like that. I have two, but you only need one. So create a formula or the rail that our cylinder will travel on, and we're gonna change the values a little bit. So for the X we can use 80, for the Y 10, and we change the equation a bit as well to cos. And I will explain later on why we change it to cos instead of sin. Now we add a cylinder, and we change the orientation to -z, radius to 10, and height to about 8. We put this cylinder inside a null by pressing Alt G, and we can rename the null to rot for rotation. And then we put this null inside another null, and we call this one main. And on the main we can add a line to spline tag, and there we pipe in our formula. And our animation gonna be around 40 frames, so type in 40 here, and we have 40 frames. And at frame 0 we put position on the align to spline tag, and on frame 40 we put 100%. And now we start to get an animation going here. To add our camera, and for that we want to add first null, and we can see that our formula have an X value of 80. Then we know that this null gonna be 80 in the X or -80. Put a keyframe there, but be sure to be on the frame 0. So on frame 0 we have -80, and on frame 40 we have 80. So now it's traveling along together with the cylinder, sort of. Now we add our camera and just put it inside our new null. We can call that one for dolly. And if you play now, you will see that we have a seamless loop. Except that we see this formula, but we won't see that in the render. Great. And we can jump out of the camera, and we can hide it as well by double clicking on this dot up here. Now we need some floor, so we can duplicate the formula, get a rectangle, size it down a bit, 2020, so we see what we're doing. Get the sweep NURB and take our formula and our rectangle and get it in there. And we need to make it thinner, so about 2. And one thing that I always try to keep in mind is to use even numbers. So here I have 2. My cylinders is 10. Because if I know what kind of numbers I have, I can calculate what distance I need to move this down. So if I know that this is 10 in the Y, and I know that this one is 2, then I know that I need to move the whole sweep down -11, and it will align perfectly. And as you can see, it goes along our path here. But we need to extend our ground a little bit, or our base a little bit. So we can do that by going into our formula and change the Tmin and Tmax value, 2 on each. And then we also need to add some more subdivisions on the spline, and we can do that by adding the sample rate here. So I usually just put 1 before the 20, so we have 120 there. And now we can also change the project settings. So we have Instagram format, so 1080 times 1080. And we can also change our camera a bit. So I like to go with pretty tight lenses. This one, Tele 135. And we start to get our animation going here. So the next thing would be to add some rotation on the cylinder. And one thing I usually do is to create a native cinema material. And then I choose texture, surfaces, and checkerboard. And place that on there. And then we will have a nice reference for how much rotation we need. And then we're gonna animate our null here in this direction. And the reason we're using nulls here is because we want to be able to change the design later on, but still keep all the animation. So if we're only animating these nulls, we can change this later on to something else. And we can add stuff into this null as well. So let's put on the rote null, put 0 on frame 0, and then we go to frame 40. And we put 720. And why do we do that? Because it looks good. And when we do loops, everything needs to go in cycles. So one lap, you probably know, is 360 degrees. But I think that's too little. Yes, it will slide. So then we take that times 2. 720. And then it looks good. Good. So that's, I mentioned 2 of my key points, and that's even numbers, keep them clean, and everything needs to go in cycles as well. And now I think we need to spice up the animation a little bit, because now everything is linear, because we told Cinema to make everything linear. So if we go in here in our F-curve manager and have a look, and yes, they are linear. And here's another great tip, and that's called time track. So if we take our rote null layer, right click, add special track, and we add a time track, then we select our rotation and we drag our time into this time track. We do the same with our position of the align to spline tag, drag in our time. And now we will be able to animate only the time parameter, and both the position and the rotation will follow this curve. And that's pretty handy, because if the animation goes, or if the cylinder moves faster, it will rotate faster as well. So now we just can tweak this a bit to make it look good. Yeah. Nice. Another thing I usually do a lot is a thing I call frame checking, and I want to check the first frame and the last frame, and they need to be identical if we're gonna have a seamless loop. And as you can see now, they are identical, except this one, but we won't see that later on. But we can make a red dot there, so we won't see it now either. And we can see, and it's perfectly identical. And I use the shortcut Shift F and Shift G to go to the first frame and the end frame. And you can check like this. And just one small thing before we round this off is when we animate along a formula, we will get some of this happening. The cylinder will be perfectly lined here, but when it goes up, we will have a small interaction here in the ground. It will be perfect here, but not on the way down here. So we're gonna do a quick fix for that. And we're doing that by animating the root layer, the Y. So first of all, we can press a keyframe here on frame 0 and 20, because they are perfect here, and one on 40 as well. And then we jump into our F curve again. And then we need to make these spline mode, so you can press here, or you can press Alt E. And we go to here, and we, bump this up a little bit, like that, and this one too. You can drag these guys out a bit as well. I think that's good enough. And there we go. And before you render this, or before you want to go further, or when you feel you're done, there's one last thing, and that would be to subtract one frame. Because now our first and last frame are identical. And if we would render this, we would have a tiny stop, because it's a double frame. So we subtract one from this, so 39. 39. And now it's a perfect seamless loop. Great. So to sum this up, there's a few things I like you to keep in mind when we continue with this masterclass. And that's frame checking. As I said a couple of times now, check last frame and first frame. And when we start to shading and lighting, it's even more important because we need to see that the light is the same and the shading is the same. Even numbers is the second thing. Try to keep things clean. So I have this 10, I have this 80, 20, 80, 10. And then I know where to put stuff to make them perfectly aligned. And that's also a great thing to keep in mind when we're gonna do seamless stuff. And the time track in the F curve is a great way to get the position and the rotation work perfectly. And you don't need to tweak each curve to match. And the last thing would be to always keep in mind that things need to go in cycles. So things need to rotate 360 degrees, or this formula goes in a cycle as well. It goes up and down, up and down. And that's pretty much it. And I'm looking forward to see you in the next lesson.